Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 19th of November 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by live Skype link by John Hurst from the British Constitution Group. And John will be giving us an update to the Thomas Crawford affair, the mortgage case, and Tom Crawford appearing in court. But before we get there, what's been happening with the weather? Well, the report is pretty gloomy because it's raining in London, where John Hurst is at the moment. It's raining in Norfolk, Brighton, Plymouth, Manchester. It's not looking too good. We like it that way, so keep smiling. Well, let's just have a look at a couple of the reports of the John Crawford case. We've got BBC Nottingham here. It says, well, it says nothing really, because at the time, Mr. Crawford was fighting eviction from his house. This is after a mortgage scam. The BBC reported not one shred of serious journalism investigation into the case, or indeed the fraud committed within the courts handling the case. The Daily Mail went in a different direction. It just talked about the people, but it said it was heartwarming to see 200 strangers joining forces to stop a cancer sufferer 63 being evicted by bank after he lost battle over the mortgage payments. But what didn't the Daily Mail do? Well, they didn't do one shred of serious investigation to actually report on the mortgage fraud itself. So, John, what can you tell us? What did that lead on to with Mr. Crawford?
Well, Tom was acquitted of assault on police yesterday. There was a large police operation known as Operation Hooper, apparently 200 altogether, including the bailiffs, about 70 bailiffs or whatever they're called these days, enforcement agents. And at the end of the day, Tom was arrested because a PC feared a breach of the peace. Now, Tom has spent the day walking around haranguing everybody, telling them all about what you've just said, mortgage fraud, and I've been cheated, and the court didn't get it right, and so on. The PC and the sergeant that arrested him, despite having met him up to 10 times or being near him up to 10 times during the day, didn't know any of that. They couldn't remember what he said, and all they feared was a breach of the peace because he was talking loudly into his mobile phone. And basically 10 of them rushed him, and one claims his leg was kicked. Fortunately, there were multiple videos of what went on, and the magistrate viewed them. And the most important bits were two. For those that have seen the videos, there's the one where an official in the obligatory yellow waistcoat with HM Court Service approaches Tom. There's a police inspector standing next to him, and Tom says to him, "Are you the bailiff? What's your name? And have you got the warrant?" And basically, the bailiff turns and walks away. And Tom says to the inspector, "Look, he's committing a crime. You're arresting him." What Tom's referring to is there's a recent Act of Parliament that clarifies that before a property can be seized, or after a property can be seized, the occupier or the owner must be shown identification for the person that did it and the warrant. And of course that didn't happen. It's heads we win, tails we lose, really, because Tom was arguing self-defence. And as you know, there are three things you can defend: life, liberty, and property. So Tom's defending property. And there's a little-known common law concept called recapture, which is spelt the way it sounds. And it confirms that the individual can recover his property without going to court first. Now, that's stating the obvious, you might think, but a lot of common law is common sense, isn't it? So when Tom's seeking to recover his property, that's what he's doing. And the rooftop 7, it's gone up from 6 to 7. We're doing a similar thing on Tom's behalf. They were trying to recapture the property. The limitation on recapture is providing there's no breach of the peace. But it's a little known common law power. I know about it because 30 years ago I was there was some Irish travellers that landed on a piece of private land, an industrial estate car park, and they were evicted by some security officers. And the police were called because the travellers were upset. And one of the travellers, I think it's probably the first time I ever saw House Laws of England. One of the travellers had an extract from it. Our House Laws of England. Have you read this? Oh, common law recapture. And he gave me a copy, and the rest is history.
Right. So Tom was charged with assault. How did events go in the court itself?
Well, the case management scheme was very poor. The CPS on at least 2 occasions sent correspondence in Tom's name, but with other people's particulars on the attached forms. which is a breach of the data protection as it happens, and we'll be coming back to them on that. There was no identified case progression officer on their side, and the judge basically let them get away with it. The Crown prosecution lawyer who presented the case quoted a judgment called Abbott against Lavin, 1981, and misquoted it. And I happen to know that one. And Abbott against Lavin says it's the right of the individual to arrest the person who's breaching the peace. That's what he said, but the full quote is it's the right and duty to arrest the person breaching the peace. So Tom was arrested for breach of the peace by the policemen exercising their common law powers, acknowledged by Abbott against Lavin. And of course, Tom was doing the same thing in reverse. He was protecting his property at common law. The judge went down the route of the policeman used excessive force. That's what he put in his judgment. The policeman used excessive force, and therefore the arrest wasn't justified. But he'd had the opportunity to read at length a sort of 20-page defence which Tom had put forward, which explained everything you just mentioned about the fact that the Building Society committed fraud when they took the case to county court. It talks about the statute of fraud 1677, which means if you haven't got a signed document, you can't start a repossession case, and so on. In the end, the PCs are unconvincing witness because they couldn't remember what they were briefed. They couldn't remember what had happened during the day. They couldn't hear what Tom was saying. It's just that he was talking in a loud voice the moment before he was arrested, and they feared he was going to cause disorder. And it was all very weak. I'm not sure what Tom wants to do. The individual PCs, I don't blame. I think it's a training issue. But the Chief Constable may have a problem. There's a precedent. About 15 years ago now, police received information that a man with a gun was in a hotel in Brighton somewhere. An armed response crew was dispatched, and they were briefed by a chief inspector. A PC sort of puts in the door of the room where the bad guy is, and the bad guy is in bed naked, leaps up, and the PC shoots him, and he dies. Now the PC was justified because he had an honestly held belief, but the problem was he hadn't been properly briefed. There'd been an error in the information that had been given to him, and subsequently the Chief Constable had to resign. So I can't speak for Tom, but that will be an issue, and it'll teach police forces that they've got to brief people properly. If they don't, then they're personally liable, and I think that's probably the lesson to learn from this one. The judge in his judgment stiffly didn't mention it. Said I'm not relying on all this material about the mortgage, but that will come up in the Rooftop 7 trial, which is in January. Can't say too much about that because it's sub judice, but overall it was a restore my faith in British justice, shall we say, and the judge did the right thing.
Right, thanks very much for that, John. Isn't it interesting that you cite that case, terrible case? A man is shot dead by police because they've been briefed incorrectly. And what are we witnessing at the moment? We're witnessing Sir Bernard Hogan Howe in particular saying, I need more and more and more armed police in order to counter terrorism. Well, we don't seem to be able to deal with terrorism, but when an ordinary Englishman is being unlawfully turned out of his house as a result of fraud, then the police can turn up in force and ultimately accuse him of being the one threatening a breach of the peace. So if you got the right result from that, that's good. But it seems to me we need to keep a very close eye on Britain's police forces as the number of weapons go up. And of course, as we see private security firms coming in. And I think Mike's going to be talking about that a little bit later.
Okay, well, the issue of arming police is covered by the Bill of Rights. As you probably know, the reason the police aren't routinely armed with firearms is that when the Metropolitan Police Act 1829 is being debated in Parliament in 1829 or thereabouts, the Bill of Rights was cited, and there's a prohibition on the Crown may have a standing arm in peacetime with consent of Parliament. And Parliament didn't give consent for an armed police force in 1829. And as far as I know, they haven't now, so it's unconstitutional. Our Scottish friends are suffering from the same syndrome, aren't they? There's an armed police force being invented. Having said that, I'm for the Israeli system, which is arm the public. And that seems to work throughout history. So that's the route I go down.
Okay, well, I think personally I support that as well. Of course, we're very, very vulnerable by the fact that we're not armed. So if you're listening to today's UK column or watching today's UK column from the United States, hang on to those firearms. Well, John, you've recently been to a conference where the subject was mortgages and, in fact, the mortgage scam, the monetarisation of mortgages. What can you tell us about that meeting?
Mike Grant Sinclair, who's a leading researcher on the mortgage scam, the money created out in there, Babylonian money, otherwise known as Babylonian money magic, called a conference in Warwick on Saturday. It was short notice, and about 60 people came, but they were all committed activists. And you've probably heard me. There's a theory about the spread of ideas. When you worry about something, the first people you tell are your trusted friends, and if you convince your friend there's a problem, they'll tell others, and eventually you get a positive feedback or a tipping point where everyone takes up the idea, a variation on the 100 monkey idea. Well, that's what happened. We had about 60 activists in a room, and the atmosphere was electric. And Ben Gilroy came. Now I've been aware of Ben Gilroy for some time, but I haven't researched his stuff. But I will do in future, and I commend it to anybody else because he's probably 2 years ahead of us. And one of the most important things I discovered was that Southern Irish judgments can be relied on by the British courts. So you remember we were looking for judgments looking to bring judgments from Northern Ireland across the water. Well, there's another way of doing it. So that's what we're working on now. Mike Grant Sinclair has called another conference in January, and Ben Gilroy will give him the stage for 2 days and spread the word. It's nothing we didn't know, but he's now being successful in the courts there. And we'll be seeking to bring his judgments across here.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. And just to ask you this question live on air, please answer if you can. If you can't, we'll get it out another way. But a lot of people asking about progress with grand juries.
Yes, there's still three. There's one before Luton Court. I'm still waiting for the Luton Magistrates Court. They haven't responded yet. There's the Linda Lewis one. I'm waiting for them to get back to me. I understand they've set up some sort of scheme whereby they're implementing it, but their case was before Swansea. Was it Cardiff or Swansea, Tina? Cardiff Magistrates Court, and they withdrew their cooperation with that one, and I'm waiting for them to bring their cooperation back. And the third one is I've got a firearms one. We're preparing a case to go in front of the High Court. Now, there's a new procedure I wasn't aware of until about 3 months ago. It's called the Voluntary Bill of Indictment. And a Voluntary Bill of Indictment is a power for the Crown Court, a power for the High Court to put the case in front of a criminal pettit jury. So 3 of them are on the go. I did say these things take time, but they're bubbling away in the background.
Okay.
So 3 of them before the courts as we speak.
All right, thank you for that. We will do our best to get a written update out on this, because I think this is what people are after, is to be able to read with some reassurance that there is still progress on this. And of course, many people sitting in the wings waiting to see whether they can use grand juries themselves to progress their own cases. If you're new to British Constitution Group, you're new to the UK column, what we're really talking about here is people, ordinary people, taking power back into their own hands by the use of essentially common law. So we are becoming very well aware that the judicial system and the system and justice in UK usurped by people who are themselves criminals. Mike, I believe you've got a couple of questions here for John.
Well, first of all, just want to highlight this from 38 Degrees. Today is the day that allegedly millions of voters will drop off the electoral roll because of the change in the rules. And of course, you've got to register as an individual now rather than as a household. So it used to be that one person within a household was responsible for registering all the eligible adults within that household. Now everybody has to register on their own. 38 Degrees very worried that lots and lots of people are going to be dropped off the electoral roll. And I was fascinated because at the bottom of this page here, there's a link to take you to the government website in order to register to vote. The link includes almost like an affiliate link inside it, so that the government knows how many people went to register to vote from the 38 Degrees campaign. But anyway, the reason that they're concerned about this, I think, is because if people aren't registered to vote, vote. Of course, the electoral boundaries are just about to be redrawn, and they're concerned that if people aren't on the electoral register, then those boundaries will not be redrawn correctly because they won't have the right demographic information on the database. Now, obviously, people concerned about being registered to vote because of the fact that the government sells that data on to third parties. But on the other hand, John, I think I'm correct in saying that if you're not on the electoral roll, you can't take part in a jury. Is that correct?
No. There was a property qualification, but the only property qualification is for trials for treason because it's actually mentioned in the Bill of Rights. Jury members in trials of treason shall be freeholders. So the proof that you were a freeholder was originally that you were on the electoral roll because the two went together. But now anybody can vote, and the extension of the franchise and that sort of thing. I wasn't aware of that, Mike, but there is concern about the security of the or the accuracy of the electoral roll, isn't it? It sounds like a step forward not to have one householder voting, generating loads of votes for people and no check and balance being in place. That might be the reason they've done it.
So what is your attitude to the electoral roll in general?
Well, our ancestors fought the right to the vote, didn't they?
Put you on the spot a bit here. I didn't realise that.
Sure. And usually I don't have a strong opinion either way. I'm on it because I was threatened with £1,000 fine. I didn't think it was a fight I wanted to take up. So I'm there under duress. It does mean it's a tool used to justify council tax and that sort of thing for those that are interested in council tax. I haven't got a strong opinion either way because really the UK is not a democracy. The UK should be a constitutional monarchy where the monarch is bound by the constitution. A democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting for what's for dinner, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And yesterday you sent me a link to this new website, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to mention that.
For those that are interested in commercial liens, there's an issue with notaries. In the initial flurry of interest about 3 years ago in Freeman circles about commercial liens, it's perfectly good law. However, I had personal experience with Malcolm Massey. We went to see a notary, and he charged Malcolm £85 for notarising a document, but then refused to access the post box. The concept is that the notary becomes a post box, and you can say, well, nobody's got back to me at this post box, therefore they've accepted it. And the reason apparently was, Tina and I also went to one in Knighton, exactly the same thing. They're obviously working for the same hymn sheet. They were told not to touch any Freeman type cases. So Dr. Rick is the chap that's organised this website. Is a friend of ours. He's doing it online, and of course this day and age nobody goes and reads newspapers or goes to the libraries and looks at notice boards. He's created a website which serves the purpose of publicising liens. I'm going to put some of mine on there shortly.
So that's at publicnoticeuk.com.
Yeah, easy to find, and in this day and age, it's I think it's the way to go. It's acknowledged in the Bills of Exchange Act, as you probably know. Two householders can notarise something as well, so there's an alternative.
Okay. Well, John, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that. It's good to see that there is progress, people beavering away to take on the criminal activities of the British government and the so-called British justice system.
Actually, to be fair to them, the judge yesterday did his job under heavy scrutiny. Obviously, 15 people or 20 people at the back of the court glaring at him, but he did the right thing. And before we went online, didn't we? You and I, having been in the establishment, we know there are good guys in the establishment, and I think you used the phrase, lots of good guys, not so many brave ones.
Well, that's absolutely true. I'm going to stick by my guns, though, and say that the system itself is corrupt. Yes, there are good people inside it, but the big problem at the moment is many are still too scared to speak out. So the more people that come forward, the better it is. Well, we live in troubled times, and of course, at the moment, we are to be vigilant and spying on our neighbours. We're to be fearful because we're all going to die as a result of terrorist attacks. Also, David Cameron would have us believe. It's getting worse, Mike, apparently.
Yes, this is an interesting development because the French Prime Minister is now warning of chemical and biological attack and he's saying that there's a danger of attack in France using biological weapons. We must not rule anything out, he said. There's also the risk from chemical and biological weapons. And so he went on, more than ever, it's time for Europe to adopt the text to guarantee the traceability of movements, including within the Union. It is a condition of our collective security. But what fascinates me is in all the rhetoric that we've heard in the last 3 or 4 years over Syria, it's all been Assad's chemical weapons. Assad has chemical weapons. And never has it been acknowledged that there have been chemical weapons on the other side of the argument. So the rhetoric up until now has been if there was a chemical weapon attack anywhere, it must have been Assad because he's the only one with chemical weapons. But yet we seem to be having an acknowledgement here from the French authorities that ISIS has chemical weapons. So I think this is quite a shift in the position. And you do have to wonder whether they're just making this up as they go along.
Well, I'm going to step straight in, Mike, and say that's my opinion, and I do hope that a blue hard hat isn't a solution to chemical weapons, as per the picture you've just had up. But as this Paris story unfolds, things get more and more bizarre. So if the risk is now of biological and chemical weapons, let's have a look at the BBC solution, because here is the definitive BBC statement. It's by a lady called Camilla Ruz, and it's what you should do in an attack. Now, brace yourselves, because that, of course, is the first piece of advice. Here we go. If you're a weak disposition, look away. Be prepared, because if you hear fireworks, for example, those could be gunshots. I'm paraphrasing because the article is too dreadful. You must read it. React quickly. Don't be confused. Make yourself a smaller target. Take cover. Fighting back, well, it works in some situations, but it doesn't in others. After the escape, continue to remain vigilant. And here we go. Help each other. Cooperate with others. Well, this article really takes some reading. It's confusing. It's poorly researched. I personally think it's extremely dangerous because there's no priority given to people as to what they should do. So the article itself is confusing. Well, what sort of expert would the BBC use to produce this sort of advice on what to do in a terrorist threat? Well, just meet this lady here. Here she is. Here's Camilla. And she states in the video, which I've got on screen, that she was, quote, brought up in a zoo. Well, if you think that's a bit of a joke, it's absolutely true. She was trained as a zoologist, but she's now a BBC journalist advising us on terror. And I'm just going to bring back in here the fact that the advice itself is dangerously confusing and, of course, ends up with the chances of being caught up in a major attack are still low, which surprises me because, of course, the government is telling us that we should be vigilant and watching our neighbours because all of us at some time would appear likely to be caught up in a terrorist attack. Before I give you a couple of words on this, John, I'd thought let's have a look at the lady. Well, here she is. She's very keen on her animals. She would be. She's a trained zoologist. But remarkable that on her Twitter page, here's her tweet about her own article, what you should do in a major terrorist attack. And by coincidence, 2 hours later, Mark Easton from the BBC has said, oh, well, the government has put out its own advice. Is there a safe route? Run, if not hide. So this sounds like something out of a comedy film. I believe this is because we are being told an absolute pack of lies about terrorism and the terrorist threat. And so the advice as to how to deal with this pack of lies is going to be confusing. John, any comments?
Well, I've got two comments. I used to be a crime prevention officer, cut long story short, and there were debates in official circles about this. There's an American and British approach. The American approach is a famous colonel from the United States Marine Corps in World War II, and then became a pistol expert in later years. And in America, you watch your front sight and press don't snatch the trigger, and then shoot the blighter. The British approach, there's lots to be said for the play dead, and I'm surprised as a zoologist she doesn't know this. So research has shown that when predatory animals such as lions are putting down antelopes, If the antelope plays dead, quite often the lions break off their attack because they're stimulated by movement to activate them to exercise their natural instincts. So I think play dead is probably the best ploy for the untrained and the unarmed on the mainland. And in fact, a lot of the survivors actually give that account, don't they? I was shot, or I was lying on a dead person, I didn't move. So a crowd of people being gunned down. I'm afraid play dead is the only best advice I can give.
Right, thanks for that, John. I did paraphrase some of it. If you read the article yourself, you'll see why I've pulled out this article and brought it forward. But actually, the playing dead is mentioned in there because, of course, it has been used in a number of situations, not moving. But I'm going to reiterate the fact that when you read through this article, particularly people who've got no training whatsoever in dealing with those sorts of situations, it's confusing. And I'll come back to the basics. Is this lady really qualified to be the BBC's lead on what to do in a terrorist attack? She might have been better talking about climate change and those naughty beavers and ground squirrels in the tundra. But Mike, King Cameron is speaking out on the United Nations.
Well, of course, he wants to organise a new British action in Syria. But it was this quote I wanted to pull out because it is pretty staggering. It's always preferable in these circumstances to have the full backing of the United Nations Security Council. But I have to say what matters most of all is that any action we would take would be legal. So I just decided we'd put up what he was actually thinking. Because, of course, it worked for Tony. It's bound to work for him. It's okay, David, don't worry. We'll make sure that when Tony goes to The Hague, you're not far behind him. That's all I want to say on that. There's no more to be said.
Well, this is a particularly interesting one, Mike, because we're going to link in with some other United Nations stuff in a moment. But King, if you're the king, of course, King Cameron, you're going to need a plane. Is that right?
You do need a plane. So, indeed. David Cameron and senior ministers are to be given the use of a dedicated plane for long-distance trips instead of taking chartered flights, apparently. Well, there you go. It's going to be £10 million is what it's going to cost, £775,000 a year. It's not quite Air Force One. It's basically they're taking one of the converted Airbuses that the RAF has bought recently, and they're going to reconvert it to put seats back in it. And he's going to run around in it. Well, apparently a government source said this is about saving taxpayers' money. There'll be upfront costs, but using a refitted RAF Voyager instead of chartering private aircraft for each long-distance trip will save the taxpayers around £775,000 a year. So that's brilliant, isn't it?
Apparently the wallpaper's very nice, I hear from quasi-military sources. So well done, David. He can now... He's trying to mimic the President of the United States, I think, isn't he? Is what's going on.
Yeah, well, the question is how's he paying for it? And maybe the next one gives a clue. Because this is BuzzFeed who've been looking at some Tory party funding. And it seems that they have had a fresh batch of donations of £217,500 from Leica Mobile. And BuzzFeed had been exposing this company for what they were describing as deeply suspicious business practices. So they've had this £200,000 donation from them, and that was £117,500 in the last quarter, and a £100,000 personal gift from the £100,000 of it rather was a personal gift from the chief executive. Now, that means that the Tory party has received more than £1.5 million from this company since David Cameron came to power. Now, why is this a concern? Well, because these guys have been caught basically running around London in three or four vans, unmarked vans, with bags of cash, which they then deposit in various post offices around London. There's now been an internal inquiry launched by their bank, which is Santander. Santander, of course, knows a lot about money laundering, so they would be expert in actually working out whether this is money laundering or not. I suspect I know what the outcome of that's going to be, but nonetheless, this company, according to BuzzFeed, pretty dodgy practices. but they seem to be laundering some of their money, at least through the Conservative Party.
Well, that would certainly be an appropriate place for that money to go. We'll mention a little bit more about money coming into the Conservative Party. But of course, if David Cameron's got Air Force One, then what he needs is the Air Force to do the rest of it. And he's in Parliament saying that I will push ahead with Syrian airstrikes, and he's going to back the strikes even if the public oppose, because he will always do the right thing to make the countryside safe. This is unbelievably frightening language. We should just forget any opinion held individually or as members of the public. We should just trust David Cameron, because although his party may accept a little bit of dodgy money, he's going to do the right thing to make the country safe. And so he made these comments after Angus Robertson, the SNP leader in Westminster, cited a poll that suggested just 15% of the public thought the UK should carry out immediate airstrikes on Syria in retaliation for the Paris atrocity. And Cameron said if they had vetoed or threatened with a veto over and over again, my job, frankly, as Prime Minister is not to read a Survation opinion poll, but to do the right thing to keep our company safe. I'm very interested to see that the Chancellor seems to think that further raids on Syria, death, destruction, that was amusing. He's woken up smiling and giggling here, Mike, but of course when we were looking at him the other day, he looked decidedly bombed out, as if he's been drinking a glass of Coke through a straw.
Indeed, it wasn't the worst example of it, but he didn't quite look like he was all there, did he?
Not at all. Well, Cameron's in bunker mentality. Let's have a look at what that sort of mentality can do in the world. We got a heads up this morning that there was a very big movement of Syrian refugees, which we were told were going to come in through Brize Norton, and this was being done secretly. We tried to phone RF Brize Norton to ask them what was going on. We did get through to a central central telephone operator, but that was in the Ministry of Defence. They wouldn't basically tell us anything, but referred us to the Home Office. So Mod refuses to answer any questions. We did get through to the Home Office, and the Home Office was happy to refer us to their VPR scheme. We'll have a look at that in a minute. They said the total numbers of Syrian refugees that would come into the country was 20,000. Glasgow Airport had been used as a destination, but they refused to say if Brize Norton or indeed any other locations in England and Wales were going to be used. When I suggested that they were deliberately withholding information, they said they weren't, but they weren't going to tell us any more. So what were they talking about? Well, here's the document, and we've now got a new name, of course. We're not talking about refugees, we're talking about vulnerable persons, Syrian vulnerable person resettlement. This is the guidance, which if you're interested, I suggest you have a look. And when you get into that guidance, you find that the government is working with the UN. So how does that come together? Well, let's just put the pieces in. Here's David Cameron. Rattling the drums, of course, for more war, airstrikes on Syria, more death, more immigrants. He's being fully supported by Theresa May and the Home Office, with the additional objective of keep the movements of the refugees secret from the British public. Just give a hint with this little document. So dropping the bombs produces the immigration, and of course the aim is to open the UK doors to those poor refugees. And I've used the word poor. That is meant. We realise that these people are being used as political tools by the British government. But here's the spin, because the Home Office is linked into the UNHCR organisation, which is helping refugees across the world. But when I spoke to that organisation this morning, they said they couldn't possibly be criticising David Cameron for wanting to drop more bombs. They weren't allowed to comment. But of course, the UN as a whole was trying to stop the bloodshed in Syria. I thought this was a bit hypocritical, but this is how the system works. We then discovered that UNHCR is in partnership with Goldman Sachs. That seemed to me to suggest that the very banks who are bankrolling the governments dropping the bombs and munitions are supposedly in partnership to help the poor people who are being displaced from their homeland. This is pretty sick stuff, John. You've only just got to scrape the surface now to see that something is badly wrong in the way that Parliament, I'm going to say, is not conducting itself, because, of course, there's been no proper debate on Syria.
Strictly speaking, it's the royal prerogative to declare war, isn't it? And deploy the armed forces. So I think there was an attempt to create an Act of Parliament which said that they should be consulted. Parliament should be consulted before war was declared. So that's one thing. Letting potentially dangerous individuals into the country is well, treason is the only word for it, isn't it?
Absolute treason, and of course it's cynical and calculated use of the people who are suffering as immigrants. Let's have a look at this slide from UNESCO, which of course is the United Nations Education, Science and Cultural Organisation. This is quite old, it's Julian Huxley, but he said there are thus two tasks for the mass media division of UNESCO, the one general, the other special. The special one is to enlist the press and the radio and the cinema to the fullest extent in the service of formal and adult education of science and learning, art and culture. The general one is to see that these agencies are used to contribute to mutual comprehension between different nations and cultures, and also to promote the growth of a common outlook shared by all nations and cultures. The task is to help the emergence of a single world culture with its own philosophy and background of ideas and its own broad purpose. Well, interesting to see that here's President François Hollande at UNESCO helping the agenda post the Paris attacks. So it must just be a coincidence that we have the Paris bombs going off. And where does the French president go? Well, he hops straight back into UNESCO, presumably to use those attacks to help advance the UN agenda. Well, if you're not convinced by that, have a look at this gentleman. Here we are, the head of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, Peter Dennis Williams Sutherland, KCMG. And he said in 2012, the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine the homogeneity of European countries. So you couldn't get more blunt than that. Here is one of the bigwigs calmly stating we're going to break down nation states. How do you do that? Of course, by creating massive swathes of immigration, displacing people with so-called war violence and so-called terrorism. What sort of man is he? Well, he's a representative for the UN for migration. He's chairman of Goldman Sachs, as you are. He's vice chairman of the European Round Table of Industrialists. He's steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. He's chairman of the London School of Economics, Council on Foreign Relations, and chairman of the Trilateral Commission. So there's the policy. We now know what the violence is for. It's to create the migration to break down the nation states. And let's bring in David Cameron. We've shown this picture many times before, but it is so cynical. What a media feast this is. We say hypocrite at work. King David, funded by ex-international arms dealers and billionaires. But what he's saying is, send us your Syrian children. So remember that he was personally helped into becoming leader of the Tory party by Paolo Zabludowicz, who donated money. That's a former arms dealer, Israeli Finnish. And that gentleman's wife, of course, is the lady who ran the art exhibition, proudly showing Jesus Christ with an erection. So for the blue rinse Tories out there, if you still believe David Cameron is a Christian, I think not. But in any case, by their fruits you shall know them. So what is the fruits of David Cameron? War and destruction. Thank you very much to the local viewer that spotted this one, because we've got HMS Defender. I nearly said the Type 45 frigate of the Royal Navy, but they do have a few more. But this one has gone off basically to be servant to the French Navy. So Defender has gone off to the Mediterranean to act as air defence ship for the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle. Of course, Charles de Gaulle as an aircraft carrier just about managing to go to sea. Constant defects, really obsolete.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Is it there as a defence ship, or is it there as a life raft?
Well, it's there as a floating airfield, basically, Mike. It's capable of floating. It's got a flat top so that they can land jets and jets can take off. But my goodness, this is no comparison to an American aircraft carrier. And remember that we're in this pitiful state because it's been David Cameron that has decimated the Royal Navy, removed our carriers, and although we've got new aircraft carriers building, we don't have any aircraft from them because the Lockheed F-35 proving to be woefully inadequate. But here's Michael Fallon. He's been bigging up and saying that we've got to get in and support the French, and we've got to attack those brutal jihadists who the British government is funding. But of course, remember, the British government is only funding the good terrorists. David Cameron's not funding the bad terrorists. But in any case, we're going to support the French. And this is using Article 42.7 of the EU treaty, which effectively says that basically countries within the European Union should support each other if there's armed aggression on its territory. I'll just read that. The solidarity clause that states that if a member of the European Union is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, other states have an obligation of aid and assistance by all the means in their power. Now, people have interpreted this and said, well, this doesn't actually mean military power, but Mr. Fallon, of course, is desperate to get the munitions into Syria, and he's fully backing David Cameron for airstrikes. John?
Credit to you, Brian, because 5 years ago you were talking about hidden treaties with France, military treaties, weren't you? And of course, I think they're about to be activated. There's no need for governments to get involved in this. If there's a treaty, the politicians say treaty takes authority over national law. It's similar to the First World War, isn't it? Then entangling treaties, entangling railway timetables, and then a world war. It's not good.
It really is frightening stuff, but what I think is encouraging is that it's becoming so obvious what is being put together. As I've said several times over the last few days, we know now that senior British military officers are stunned and outraged at what is actually happening around them. I've accused some of them of being cowards. I stand by that, but we do see signs finally of some of these men and women starting to think about the fact that David Cameron is simply running the country as if it was his private toy. Where does mass surveillance stand in this, Mike?
Well, this is an interesting article from the New York Times because they're absolutely coming out against mass surveillance, and they're particularly targeting John Brennan, who's head of the CIA, that was giving everybody such a hard time for complaining about mass surveillance over the last few days. Brennan basically saying, you know, we've no right to complain about people being blown up or shot in Paris because we took away the intelligence services power to defend us from such atrocities, apparently. But the New York Times here saying mass surveillance isn't the answer to fighting terrorism. It's a wretched yet predictable ritual. After each new terrorist attack, certain politicians and government officials waste no time in exploiting the tragedy for their own ends. The remarks on Monday by John Brennan, the director of the CIA, took it to a new and disgraceful low. So it's good to see at least one mainstream outlet writing an opinion piece by their editorial team that falls on the right side of this argument, I think.
Showing some common sense. Well, if the common sense is coming through there, just have a look at this. This is Western Morning News, not only flagging up support from the French with a strange ban the bomb symbol over the French flag, not sure what that's about. Of course, it's the Eiffel Tower, but there's some strange symbology there. 4-ton drones to be tested over Cornwall. What we are seeing here is the development of a pan-EU drone base from the extensive Newquay Airport, as it now is, runway. This is one of the largest runway in Europe, and of course at the tip of Cornwall it's effectively isolated. So here's the article, but don't worry, these are all nice drones. Now if you go to view the Western Morning News's gallery, this is actually the picture that comes up, and the moment I saw it I thought to myself, what is really going on here? We've got German drones.
It looks like a V1.
It looks like a V1 flying bomb. We've got a German drone, which we are proudly saying is going to be flying out of Cornwall Air Base. And if you read the article, these are the sort of statistics. It's estimated there could be around 24 drones, which can be up to 15 meters. I'm not sure what that is in real length. I think that's about 40 feet probably, taking off and landing every day by 2030, some 6,000 drone movements a year. And let's look at this for sheer nonsense. Cornwall Councillor John Fitter said people were relaxed about the plans. People know about the drones, they're proven. No one can say there will never be a situation, but I'm confident they'll be just as safe as a plane with a pilot at the joystick. The only people who have had a moan are the general aviation community, worried they will be impeded. So here is this councillor totally oblivious to the fact that he has got a local air facility now being used to test and operate European drones, an invasion of military from Europe. And of course it was Nick Green who originally pointed out that the French had got French army units embedded in the St Morgan facility, and they've been there for several years. What is also special about that particular base is the underground bunkers and the control centre facilities there. So I'm going to say, Mike, I think this is extremely sinister. And of course, there are some reports saying that drones have been used in the Paris skies with the intent of monitoring, of course, for so-called terrorists. Are we going to get to the situation where David Cameron calmly says in the morning that he wants this list of people taken out and off go the drones over the skies of London and Cornwall to do it? I think we're getting very close. Possibly. Well, we've mentioned the police. We've got the hype on the terrorism and dealing with terrorism. Somebody pointed out that this radio station has got an extremely good interview with the daughter of murder victim Mohammed Salim. This man murdered with right-wing circumstances in 2013. But the point being made here is that the police seemed unable to cope with the circumstances around this, and taking on board John Hurst's comments that not all police men and women are bad. I certainly don't think that's the case, but I think we do need to be looking at how capable our police are at doing their normal policing job, and in particular protecting us against people who are dangerous. So if you haven't come across this one before, you might like to visit and have a look. But we shouldn't worry about the police, Mike, should we? Because it's all going to be privatised.
Yes, indeed. And I have to say, this I'm not really going to focus on the content of the article itself, because of course G4S is in for whatever reason G4S is still in the frame for getting government contracts, despite the fact that they have demonstrated their corruption in the past with regard to tags, and the fact they were claiming money for managing tags for people who had in the meantime passed away. G4S claiming that those people were still alive and being tracked with tags. But nonetheless, this, I have to say, looks to me like a police story. And I would like to ask the BBC, or I'd like as many people as possible to ask the BBC, were they paid for this article? Because it is simply an advertisement for G4S. And I think independently you came to the same conclusion, Brian, but it read like an advertisement. G4S could have written this. It was probably their PR team, in fact.
Well, I found it outrageous. You'd picked it up as well, so you've led on it. But of course, in this BBC advert, there is a so-called BBC analysis calmly saying, well, we need G4S because indeed they can save the police money, and it's only the old codgers at the top of the police who don't want this necessary change. Outrageous advert come propaganda from the BBC, and its objective is clearly to help the privatisation of police. Just a quick answer, John, if you will, because we're getting a bit tight for time.
There's no substitute for local knowledge and human knowledge in dealing with emergency calls, because people aren't at their best. They can't remember their phone number, they can't remember their postcode, they're under stress, that sort of thing. And I don't think technology can substitute. And I think you always need a certain police presence in the control room, because policemen are students of human nature. And they'll have the local knowledge from having been out on the streets before they're in the control room. Completely privatising it is not a good thing. It probably won't work, and they'll have to reverse it in a few years' time. I'm told that senior officers get promotion by coming up with a scheme, get their promotion, and then retire on pension, and the next generation sort it out. It seems like that's what's happening here.
Okay. Well, we will be ending on some good news. Before we get to that one, we've got a Chatham House event and TTIP.
Occasionally you come across a tweet which is just so crass that it needs to be highlighted. So I'm not going to make any comment other than just to ask people to read this. It says, on #TTIP, the Prime Minister will not be agreeing to anything not in the interests of the British people. And that's from Chatham House. So you do have to wonder whether anything that ever comes out of the Royal Institute of International Affairs is whether they can really expect to be considered to have any credibility, because if this tweet is representative, they don't.
Okay, but the good news is China seems to have got the right idea.
Yes, indeed, because Bloomberg here reporting that Wall Street, City of London, pretty upset about the fact that China is cracking down on corruption in the financial sector. Now, of course, China has been suffering on the financial sector with their stock market recently, and there's been quite a bit of rumour about external influence in that, and it seems that they are cracking down. So Bloomberg is saying the high drama highway arrest of a prominent hedge fund manager, seizures of computers and phones at Chinese mutual funds, the investigations of the president of CITIC Securities Company and at least 6 other employees now add the probe of China's former gatekeeper of the IPO process himself. The arrests or investigations targeting the finance industry in the aftermath of China's summer market crash have intensified in recent weeks, creating a climate of fear amongst China's financial firms and chilling their investment strategies. So 16 people arrested so far, including Zhu Zhang, the manager of Zexi Investment, and this is known as Chinese #1 hedge fund. So the Chinese cracking down on this type of speculative activity, which is really affecting them internationally, and glad to see at least one country in the world taking no nonsense from these types of people.
Oh. Okay, well, I've popped it in a bit quickly there, but encourage people who haven't yet seen it to watch our news from yesterday. The thing on the right of your screen there is one of Britain's new paramilitary police officers. It's not a bug or something out of Star Wars, apparently. That is a policeman or woman under all of that costume. But in the news from yesterday, some very serious analysis of what's going on around the Paris terror attack, what our security forces have been up to, and what's actually happening in Europe as a result. So if you haven't seen that, please have a look. And thank you to all the people who've contacted us to tell us we're doing a good job. To end on the cheery note, we've shown this before, but we do like it, of course. GCHQ watching us, watching them, watching us, I think is how it works. So if you're there in GCHQ, I hope you've enjoyed today's UK column. I was sorry that nobody in your media department was able to tell us yesterday why Turkey, Fox News, the Israelis and others were warning of the Paris attacks as far back as September. But GCHQ, with 1.55 billion of public funding, just didn't seem to know. Maybe too much time watching the UK column by your desk officers. So if you like what UK column does, you like to support us, please consider taking out a membership or making a donation. Before we go, John, thank you very much for joining us. Please keep us up to date with the grand juries and the progress of the Rooftop 6. Is it still to go through court?
Well, it's 7 now, actually, because Tom's son Craig was added to the list for throwing a pack of sandwiches onto the roof. He was obviously he joined the conspiracy by doing that.
That was probably chemical warfare, act of terrorism, I think. On that happy note, we'll leave you. We'll be back same time tomorrow for more reporting on what's really happening in UK. Bye-bye.